It started the way these things always do, quietly. No thunderclaps, no dramatic violins, no warning bells in the distance. Just the soft thud of a suitcase being rolled across hardwood, the familiar creak of the guest bedroom door swinging open, and a voice I hadn't heard in nearly 20 years calling out down the hallway. "Claire? It's me. You home?" I was standing in the kitchen, still in my robe, holding a glass of orange juice and watching condensation drip slowly down its sides. It was a Tuesday morning, unusually hot for early June. The AC hadn't kicked in yet, and I could already feel the sweat gathering under my bra. "Back here," I called, my voice a little too high, too startled. I hadn't expected him until the afternoon. I heard him coming before I saw him. Heavy, confident footfalls on the wood floor, the kind that belong to someone who doesn't tiptoe through life. Then he appeared in the doorway, broad-shouldered and tan, with hair a shade darker than mine, and the kind of jawline you didn't often see past 40. "Hey, Claire." His smile disarmed me, just like it had the first time I met him. Though back then I'd had a different last name, and he'd been the sullen, too handsome son of the man who'd just married my mother. "Nick," I said, recovering quickly and stepping forward to give him a hug. God, it's been almost 2 decades. 18 years, he said, pulling back and looking me over. "You haven't changed a bit," I laughed. Flatterer. "I've changed a lot. But you? Jesus. What did they feed you in the Navy?" He chuckled. "Regret and protein bars." I noticed how good he looked in that plain white t-shirt, tied around the biceps, soft at the collar, a little wrinkled. There was a small scar at the edge of his jawline I didn't remember from before. My husband, Mark, was already gone for work. Tuesdays were his longest days, office until 6, then dinner with clients. He wouldn't be back until nearly 10. Nick looked around. "Nice place. Bigger than I thought." I nodded, setting my glass down. "Mark likes space. I like light. So we compromised." He laughed. It was a deep, rich sound, unforced. I guided him to the guest room, made a show of fluffing the pillows, asked if he needed a towel. He said no, he just wanted a shower and maybe something cold to drink after. As I walked back to the kitchen, my thighs brushed under the hem of my robe, and I realized I hadn't tied it as tightly as I thought. My reflection in the hallway mirror caught me off guard. 49 years old, 2 grown kids, and still, for some reason, my pulse was tapping at my throat like a teenager's. It's worth explaining that my marriage wasn't bad. Not broken, not dramatic. Just beige. Mark was a good man. He paid the mortgage on time, remembered my birthday, kissed me goodnight. But passion had long since left our bedroom. In its place, polite sex every 3rd Saturday and the quiet, slow erosion of touch. Nick hadn't even been in the house 10 minutes, and I could already feel something loosening in my chest, something I hadn't even realized was tight. When he reemerged, his hair was damp, his forearms gleaming slightly as he wiped them with a towel. He wore jeans and nothing else. I handed him an iced tea and tried not to stare at the faint trail of hair disappearing under his waistband. "You've done well," he said, glancing around the kitchen again. "Husband must be treating you right." I smiled, non-committal. "He's consistent." Nick raised an eyebrow. "Consistence, not always exciting." I met his eyes then, and I felt it, the subtle shift. The unspoken thing that happens when 2 people register attraction and decide, without saying a word, not to look away. The next few days passed like a slow burn. He was polite, helpful, sweet even. He insisted on doing the dishes, offered to mow the lawn, fixed a hinge that had been squeaking for months. Mark was cordial with him, maybe even a little envious. They got along well enough. Nick knew how to fade into the background, to make himself small when necessary. But with me, he was different. Open. Teasing. There was a low, constant tension between us, like a guitar string tuned just a hair too tight. Every brush of his arm, every shared glance across the dinner table, felt like it carried an entire sentence inside it. On Thursday night, Mark went to bed early, nursing a headache. Nick and I stayed up watching an old movie, something black and white, something with too much smoke and too many secrets. At some point, I noticed how close we were sitting. Our knees were nearly touching. The wine had warmed me just enough to let my shoulder lean into him, only slightly. His hand, resting on his thigh, was less than an inch from mine. When I looked up at him, his gaze didn't move from the screen, but I felt his fingers brush mine. Lightly. Testing. I didn't pull away. We sat like that for what felt like forever, skin against skin, breath slow, hearts misbehaving. And then he spoke, voice low. Do you ever think about it? About what? What did it be like if we weren't who we are? I didn't answer right away. I was too aware of his fingers moving now, sliding softly along the side of my hand. My throat tightened. Sometimes, I whispered. He turned to face me fully. There was something in his eyes that undid me. Something reckless, something honest. I shouldn't be saying this, he said, but you look at me the same way you used to. Like you want to do something terrible. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. I think, I said slowly, I've spent a lot of years not doing terrible things. Nick leaned in just slightly. Maybe one won't kill you. His hand moved then, not to my face, not to my waist, but to the inside of my thigh, just above the knee. It rested there like a promise. My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my gums. Still, I didn't stop him. What happened next was a slow, careful descent. He didn't kiss me that night, though God knows I wanted him to. He just stayed there, his hand warm against my skin, until the credits rolled, and we both exhaled like we'd been holding our breath. I should go to bed, I said softly. He nodded, and his hand left me as reluctantly as a tide receding from shore. Good night, Claire. I turned to leave, but before I did, I glanced back once, just to see him watching me go. That was the night I stopped being married in my heart, even if I hadn't yet in my body. It would happen. Not that night, not the next, but soon. And when it did, it would be everything I hadn't let myself want in a very, very long time. I don't think I slept the night after that movie. I lay in bed beside Mark, his back to me like always, his breathing even, steady. The ceiling fan spun overhead, casting slow-moving shadows across the room. I kept seeing Nick's hand on my thigh. The warmth of it, the confidence, the audacity, and the way I didn't move away. The next morning, everything was normal. Pancakes. Coffee. Mark reading the paper. Nick wearing that same faded navy t-shirt that clung to his back when he bent to pick up his cup. It should have felt awkward, but it didn't. It felt thrilling, like a shared secret humming beneath the surface. Mark left early again. Conference call with Europe, he said. I watched him pack his laptop bag, kiss me absently on the cheek, and disappear down the driveway. I don't remember if I kissed him back. Nick and I were alone again. He sat on the patio with his coffee. I brought mine out and stood for a moment at the threshold of the sliding door, watching him. You gonna hover there all morning? He asked without turning. I stepped out. You always this smug? Only when it's working. I sat in the chair opposite him. The air was already hot, but dry. My robe was thin cotton, tied tighter today. I hadn't put on a bra. We didn't say much at first. The silence between us had grown comfortable, charged but not strained. I sipped my coffee and looked out over the backyard, the rosemary bushes, the little water fountain Mark insisted we install but never maintained. Then Nick spoke, voice low, almost too casual. You used to wear your hair up more. I glanced at him. You remember that? I remember a lot more than I should. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My heart was too loud in my chest. He set his coffee down and leaned forward, elbows on knees. You ever think about that summer in Mendocino? When we got stuck sharing that pull-out sofa? I laughed, half-gasped. We were kids. He shrugged. Old enough. I remembered it. Of course I did. I was 25, newly engaged to someone else at the time. Nick was 18, gangly and brooding, all limbs and hormones. That was the first time I noticed him, not just as my mother's new stepson, but as something else. Something I shouldn't have noticed. There was a moment, he said, staring into his mug. You were asleep. I thought you were anyway. I rolled over, and you'd shifted, pressed right up against me. I stopped breathing. I didn't dare move. I stayed that way for what felt like an hour. You smelled like coconut shampoo. I thought I'd lose my mind. I smiled faintly. I wasn't asleep. He looked up at me then sharply. His jaw flexed, eyes narrowing. Claire. That's all he said. But in that one word was a decade of buried tension, of what-if glances, of wrong time and worse timing. He stood then, slow and purposeful, and walked over to my chair.
He didn't ask. He didn't speak.
He just knelt down in front of me and rested his hands on the arms of the chair, close enough to smell the sleep still lingering on my skin. I should have stopped him, but instead, I let him reach forward and untie the belt of my robe.
Gently.
Like he was unwrapping something sacred. I didn't stop breathing until the robe parted and the morning air hit my skin. The surprise in his face, the slow upward curl of his lips, told me everything. Jesus, he whispered. He leaned in and kissed the inside of my knee. Softly at first, reverently. I tilted my head back, eyes closed, mouth parted. His hands slid up my thighs like they'd been waiting years to do so. When his mouth found me, I gasped. It had been so long since someone had touched me like that, like he was hungry and reverent all at once. He wasn't rushed. He didn't just go through the motions. He paid attention. Every flick of his tongue, every breath against my skin, was calculated, deliberate. I moaned without meaning to, my hand tangling in his hair, my hips shifting without permission. When I came, it was almost silent, just a sharp intake of breath, a trembling exhale, and his name on my lips. Afterward, he looked up at me, lips glistening, eyes smug. Still think I'm just your stepbrother? I laughed. It sounded foreign in my throat. I don't know what you are. He stood, pulled me to my feet, and kissed me, slow and deep. His hands roamed my back, settling at the base of my spine.
You're shaking, he said.
I haven't felt this alive in years. We didn't have sex that day, not fully. But it was the first tear in the dam. The first taste of what was coming. Over the next week, we danced around it. We pretended nothing had happened. At least, in front of Mark. But behind closed doors, in small corners, in stolen minutes, we touched. We whispered. We devoured each other with our eyes. One afternoon, while Mark was on a Zoom call upstairs, Nick pulled me into the laundry room and kissed me against the dryer. My jeans were around my knees before I even realized what was happening. He bent me over, slid inside me with a low groan, and I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood. It was desperate.
Hot.
Half-clothed and fully wrong. And I never felt more wanted. Afterward, I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. He tucked himself back in, kissed my shoulder, and whispered, "You're playing with fire." I turned and looked at him. Then burn me. I know how it sounds. Foolish. Reckless. Cliché, even. But here's the thing people forget about women like me. We don't just wake up bored. We don't cheat because we're wicked. We cheat because we're starved. For touch. For praise. For passion. For someone to look at us and see us not just as wives or mothers or dependable dinner makers, but as women. As flesh and ache and need. Nick saw me. Not as someone's wife. Not as the reliable older woman who kept the house running. But as someone with curves, with secrets, with a body that still craved. And I, God help me, I saw him too. Not as my stepbrother. Not even as the kid I once babysat during awkward family holidays. I saw him as a man. A man who knew exactly what he wanted.
Me.
That kind of clarity is hard to resist. And I didn't. Not once. Not ever. The funny thing about infidelity is that it doesn't feel like a rupture at first. It feels like a flicker. Like a door creaking open in the back of your mind, one you didn't realize was there. You tell yourself it's temporary. A phase. A private indulgence, the way people sneak chocolate in the dark. But then it starts to bleed into the daylight. That's what happened with me and Nick. At first, we were discreet. Calculated.
Careful.
We stole moments, not hours. But once the floodgates opened, pretending restraint became theater. We made love in the garage once, the air hot and thick with motor oil and dust. He bent me over the hood of Mark's Lexus. Another time, it was in the shower after a jog, both of us breathless and dripping, laughing at how ridiculous it was that we couldn't keep our hands off each other. I'd never felt sex like that, not even in my 20s. Not with Mark. Not with anyone. But what was worse and better than the sex was everything around it. Nick didn't just touch me. He watched me, studied me, memorized the way I stirred my tea, the way I rubbed my shoulder when it ached. He asked questions about books I liked, about my dreams when I was younger, about regrets I didn't even know I still carried. One night, we lay in bed together after Mark had left for a business dinner that would take him out of town. Nick was supposed to be heading out himself, to San Diego, to stay with a friend, but his plans changed. I remember that night so vividly, not for how he touched, but for how he didn't. He held me, just held me, his arm under my head, my hand resting on his chest. The ceiling fan creaked above us, and somewhere outside, a sprinkler hissed. "I used to think you were untouchable," he said quietly. "Like this perfect, porcelain version of a woman." I snorted.
"You've seen me pee with the door cracked."
"Pretty sure the porcelain's chipped." "I'm serious." His hand trailed down my back. "You were this dream I used to have when I was stuck in Afghanistan. I'd close my eyes and imagine you in that yellow sundress, the one with the buttons." "You remember that dress?" "I remember everything." His voice was quiet but intense, like it burned a little in his throat.
"Nick?"
"I know it's not supposed to mean anything. I know you're married, and I'm, well, who I am. But Claire, I don't just want you for your body." That stopped me. No one had said something like that to me in years. "Then what do you want?" He didn't answer right away. His fingers laced with mine under the blanket. "I want to wake up next to you without it being a lie." My breath caught. The silence that followed was heavy. Not awkward. Just full. And dangerous. Because I knew what I was starting to feel wasn't just lust. It was something that terrified me. Something I couldn't name because if I did, it might become real. I tried to pull away after that. I thought I could recalibrate. Return to normal. Be a wife again. Fold laundry with a light heart. Kiss Mark and mean it. But it was like trying to re-enter a house you'd already burned down. Everything inside me had changed. Nick didn't push. He gave me space, even left the house for a few days. Said he needed to visit an old Navy buddy. I knew he was giving me room to figure things out. And I hated that it made me miss him even more. The first morning he was gone, I stood in the shower and cried. Not because I felt guilty. Not really. But because I didn't know how to go back to sleepwalking through my life. Mark noticed something, but not enough. He asked once if I was okay. I said I was tired. He nodded and kissed the top of my head like a coworker might. I felt a pang of something close to grief. Nick came back on a Thursday afternoon. I was watering the herb garden when I heard his car door. I turned too fast, the hose spraying my foot. He stood at the edge of the patio, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, eyes squinting in the sun. He didn't smile.
He didn't speak.
He just dropped his bag and walked over to me like he couldn't stop himself. And I didn't stop him, either. We didn't make it to the bedroom. We barely made it inside. He kissed me against the hallway wall, my shirt pushed up, jeans shoved to my knees. There was nothing tender about it. It was raw and messy and fueled by days of restraint. He entered me with a groan that echoed, and I clung to him like a woman drowning. Every thrust made me whimper, made my legs tremble. I came quickly, too quickly, burying my face in his shoulder, biting down to muffle myself. Afterward, we just stood there, breathing hard, skin sticking where it touched. "I thought about you every fucking night," he said, voice hoarse. "I thought you were trying to forget me." He shook his head. "I can't. Neither could I." That night, I told Mark I was going to bed early. Nick came to me hours later, slipped into my bed like a secret. We lay there quietly, our bodies warm under the sheet. "Do you ever think about leaving him?" he asked. I didn't answer. Because I did. And that terrified me more than anything else. Things changed after that. Not all at once. There wasn't some dramatic confrontation or discovery. But the quiet between me and Mark grew heavier, more brittle. He worked longer hours. I stopped asking when he'd be home. I stopped cooking real dinners. I told myself it was a phase, that he was just busy. But deep down, I knew I'd checked out. I gave my body to someone else. But more than that, I gave him the part of me I thought was gone. The part that could still blush.
Still ache.
Still want. Nick was still living with us under the excuse of transitioning between deployments. It worked. Mark didn't ask questions. And we got careful again, more careful than before. No more quickies in shared spaces. No more risky moments. But we still found ways. We met at hotels, cheap ones off the freeway where no one would recognize us. I wore sunglasses.
He wore a ball cap.
It felt ridiculous, like we were actors in some suburban drama. But once the door closed behind us, there was nothing artificial about it. He'd kiss me like he'd been starved for weeks, lay me back on the bed, and undress me like a ritual. There was one time, I remember it vividly, he tied my wrists with his belt, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "I want you to forget your name for the next hour." And I did. I forgot everything. I forgot I was a wife. I forgot I had a mortgage and a calendar full of dentist appointments and HOA meetings. I forgot I was supposed to be someone who never made mistakes. With Nick, I was just me. All of me. Naked in every sense. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Because I started needing it. Not just wanting it.
Needing it.
The affair wasn't an accessory anymore. It was a lifeline. But something was shifting. One night, I sat across from Mark at dinner. We were eating in silence again. The sound of our forks scraping plates was louder than the conversation. He looked older than I remembered. Not in a sad way, just real. Soft lines at the edges of his mouth, eyes a little tired. He caught me staring and smiled faintly. "You okay?" I nodded.
Yeah.
Just thinking. He reached over and squeezed my hand. "We're okay, right?" The words struck like a knife. I smiled back. I said yes. But I was lying. Not because I hated him. Not because I wanted to hurt him. But because the woman who once loved him had become a ghost in her own life. And I didn't know how much longer I could haunt the same house. Nick started spending more time away again. He said it was for work, security consulting gigs in Los Angeles, a few weekends up north for a project. But I knew what it really was: distance.
Space.
A subtle test of whether what we had only existed in stolen moments or if it could breathe in something real. And I hated him for it. And I loved him for it. Because I needed the space, too. The thing about an affair is that eventually you stop running from your marriage and start running from yourself. I saw it in the mirror every morning. The way I paused before applying lipstick. The way I lingered on my collarbone, remembering how Nick kissed it. The way I avoided my own gaze when I brushed my teeth. At night, Mark and I watched television like nothing had changed. But everything had. My body was elsewhere. My mind. My breath. I was rehearsing memories while he scrolled through news. One Saturday morning, he brought me coffee in bed.
Just like he used to.
Black with one sugar, he remembered. He sat on the edge of the bed, quiet for a long time, before he said it. "You don't touch me anymore." I blinked. "What?" "I'm not stupid, Claire." My stomach dropped. He didn't say it with anger. Or grief. He said it like he was finally telling the truth to both of us. He looked older than he ever had right then. Not in years. In something else. In understanding. "You haven't looked at me in months." I opened my mouth.
Closed it.
The words wouldn't come. Because how could I explain that it wasn't about him? That I wasn't trying to punish him, or betray him, or make him hurt. I was trying to breathe. He sighed, rubbed his temples. "Is it someone else?" I hesitated. That was all he needed. He nodded.
Stood.
Didn't raise his voice. Just walked out of the room. That was the first time I cried for Mark. Not for the man I married, but for the years. For the dinners. For the shared calendars and taxes and furniture choices. For the loyalty that hadn't saved us from becoming strangers. For the man who'd always believed I was content because I had pretended so well. Nick came back 2 days later. I met him in the backyard. I didn't wait for him to unpack. I didn't kiss him. I just handed him a glass of wine and sat beside him on the steps.
He looked at me.
Saw it immediately in my face. He knows. I nodded. What did he say? Not much. He ran a hand through his hair. Do you want me to leave? I didn't answer right away. The sun was setting. The air smelled like basil and cut grass. A neighbor's sprinkler started ticking in the distance. Finally, I looked at him. Really looked.
No.
But I think I have to. I moved into a rental apartment a week later. Small. 2 bedrooms. No garden, no patio. But it had big windows and silence. And it was mine. Mark didn't ask for anything. He didn't yell. He didn't try to fight. We signed the separation papers quietly, like 2 people canceling a reservation they'd made years ago for a dinner neither of them wanted anymore. Nick visited a few times. We tried to make it work. We ate dinner on the floor, had sex on the couch, laughed like kids. He left his toothbrush. But something was different. Without the secret, without the pressure, without the walls, what we had started to feel less like a storm and more like an aftershock.
He loved me. I didn't doubt that.
But I had changed. I wasn't the same woman he had devoured in laundry rooms and hotel beds. I was raw, awake, becoming, and I needed time. Time to learn who I was without being a wife, without being someone's anchor, without hiding. So I told him. He took it well, better than I expected. He kissed my forehead, called me brave, and said he hoped I'd come back to him. I don't know if I will. It's been 6 months. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I go to a book club at the library downtown. The women there are older, smarter, sharper than I expected. We talk about everything: sex, shame, longing, reinvention. No one judges. I have a part-time job at a flower shop. The owner, Sheila, is 70 and runs the register like a general. She lets me take home whatever's left over at the end of the day. My kitchen is always full of tulips, even when my fridge is half empty. Mark and I speak occasionally. Taxes mostly. The dog, yes, he kept the dog. He's seeing someone, I think. I hope she's warm to him. I hope she makes him laugh. And Nick? He texts me sometimes. A photo of the beach. A song we used to dance to in secret. A one-word message. Remember? And I do.
God ido.
But I don't reply every time. Because I'm not ready. Or maybe I am. I don't know. But for the first time in years, that not knowing feels okay. Because this quiet, this breath, this unfamiliar self, is not a punishment. It's freedom. Not the kind you run to. The kind you earn.